This is block 4, and we're talking about civil rights and rhetorics. So, what do you guys think MLK's themes and messages in both of his I Dream speech and his letter from Birmingham Jail?
I think that it was about rights for Black Americans in this time because they were not treated very well.
Where does that say that in the text?
Let me find it. In his I Have a Dream speech, paragraph 28, he says, "Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities."
I think one of his bigger themes was, especially in the I Have a Dream speech, that it isn't just a fight for Black people, it's for Black people and white people, and that they need to fight together. And on page 262, paragraph 9 of the I Have a Dream speech, he says, "Their destiny is tied up with our destiny. Their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom," which he's talking about white people and Black people.
Blakely, do you think that's also in the letter to Birmingham, or is it just more of I Have a Dream?
I think he talked a lot more about the ignorance of white people in the letter from Birmingham, because he brought up the white moderate a lot, and he was a little more angry in that one.
I agree with that.
I actually totally agree with this point, but instead of just whites and blacks, I really said something about him saying that they were brothers and sisters, and no matter how somebody looked or acted, they would all bond the same. And some reasons I thought that he said this was that he said we cannot do this alone. Little black boys and little black girls can hold hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. Former slaves and son of slave owners will be able to sit down together and at the table of brotherhood. So he likes to bring in like brothers and sisters.
And going off Elena, I also agree that part of this message was that blacks and whites are both people and they are like brothers and sisters and should be going together.
I agree with you. I had that they were all God's children. Like he said in the I Have a Dream speech in paragraph 6. Come to this hallowed spot. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. If they're all God's children, then they should all be created equally, and that would mean that blacks have just as many rights as the white people do.
Yeah. Very interesting point, Allison.
Tanner?
Bouncing from that to more of the letter, in paragraph 4, he writes that injustice everywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and I think that's one of his main points throughout his whole career of the civil rights.
Where did you see that in the text?
Paragraph 4 of the letter.
So basically, a lot of this sounds like we're talking about his figurative language that he uses. So, what do you think that in his I Have a Dream speech, he gives text and power and ability to inspire social changes? Okay, how about we start with you?
Okay, so in paragraph 17, he says, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." So I think that goes with coming together, and, you know.
Yeah, I personally think that he did a very good job at integrating media into his works. In the I Have a Dream speech, he references the Emancipation Proclamation, the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence, and the song "My Country 'Tis of Thee" a lot to really strengthen his speech and kind of compare it to other things. And then in the letter from Birmingham, he references more like active things that are happening and events that are currently happening.
That's a good point.
So would you say, Blakely, that his most powerful figurative language is illusion, or would you say?
I would say that, because he alluded a lot to religion, which was, something a lot of people were a big fan of, or are a big fan of, especially in 1963. So,
Ryan, what do you think was his strongest device that he used?
So strongest device. I think it's probably how he gave his speeches, because he wasn't just talking to one group of people, it was to everybody.
Yeah.
So, as if they were all together.
It's very
Yeah.
interesting.
That's-
Yeah, I would argue repetition was his most interesting rhetorical device he used,
I strongly agree with that.
especially with the repeating "I have a dream" a lot is kind of what influenced the most people.
I also
Something else that I heard him repeat a lot was him saying like 100 years later. He had a few other phrases that he repeated a lot that were pretty strong.
So,
You go.
so Jameson, for if you say the repetition is the most powerful, do you think they use that also in Letter Birmingham or more just in I Have a Dream speech?
I think that it's mostly in I Have a Dream speech and some in the letter, but most of it towards the I Have a Dream speech.
I agree with Jameson, but not fully, because when I was reading the letter from Birmingham Jail, I realized that in paragraph he would mention a lot of the same things. Like in paragraph 12, he constantly repeats, "But when you have seen," and in paragraph 16, he talks about the white moderate multiple times, so he repeats himself there to try to get his point
I
across.
get what you're saying, Allison, but I would still argue that in I Have a Dream he repeats himself a lot more with the "Let freedom ring," "We can never be satisfied," "I have a dream," and examples like that.
I would personally like to build off, but in a different direction, and say that amplification was his strongest. This is shown in on page 2, paragraph 7 of the letter, where he likes to explain extra points about how easy it was for whites to tell African Americans to just wait. He also does this on page 4 at paragraph 3, and he explains how many would look at policemen different if they really saw what they did to the African Americans. And lastly, he does it on paragraph 9 of the I Have a Dream speech, explaining how until things change that they will not be satisfied.
Going off of Ilena's point of amplification, I really think that it also is really big, especially in the I Have a Dream speech when he's like, "Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama." I think that's one of his biggest points, because he's like making change. He's like encouraging them to go out and change things for the better.
So
Yeah.
I disagree with all of that.
Okay.
I'm
Why?
gonna say metaphors
Okay.
What is your
Can you
reasoning
explain
for
more
that?
about
because there's lots.
Well,
And
where in the text?
Can you
did
give us
see
like a
that?
textual
paragraph
evidence
3,
of where that is?
paragraph 6 like 4 times, paragraph 7, paragraph 8, paragraph 13, paragraph 15, paragraph
Can you
19.
read some of those paragraphs
Can
for
you
us,
elaborate?
please?
Elaborate.
Okay, what was the strongest one that you think happened in there?
All of them were pretty good, but I'll just say like 3 just to give an idea.
Can you
Okay.
read what paragraph 3 was?
Yes, I can. The lonely islands of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. So, yeah, that's the one in paragraph 3.
I kind of agree with Cadence.
I
Another one that I thought was kind of strong was illusion,
I agree.
because he talked a lot about religion and churches and about how white churches and then black churches were really different.
So we really
But he also used it in the letter and the speech,
That's a good
which
point.
he,
That's
like
a good
Jameson
point.
said, only some was in the letter.
yes,
But I'm saying
I'd agree.
there's
even
lots
mix it
in
both.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
I
like
would
two
say
certain
that
powerful
overall we think
analogies.
amplification, repetition,
And
and
illusion.
illusion were the
And
strongest
metaphors.
ones.
And metaphors.
metaphors.
And
Yeah.
metaphors.
So how about we move on to how social progress has best been achieved?
Well, I think that it is very obvious that MLK is still a very prominent,
Yes.
figure for this movement. And as we all know, it's still something that's a problem and that happens a lot today, especially with the 2020 riots, made that very visible. And I know they used him a lot as like an example of what they were trying to achieve.
Actually, that's a good point.
I agree with I also think that how in his speech Martin Luther King piggybacked off of Abraham Lincoln. Now people in our time, activists, piggyback off of Martin Luther King's speeches and stuff.
That's a really good point.
That is.
He
I hadn't thought
mentioned
about that before.
in his speech that he hoped segregation wouldn't exist one day. And nowadays, there's not really much like segregation buildings, like water fountains for
There
colored
is no
people.
segregation.
Okay, there's not,
I was gonna say it's
But
illegal.
there still is we still are facing racial issues, like Blakely said, with
Yeah.
2020.
I agree.
In my rise and fall of Jim Crow research, I learned that there's a lot of racism issues in school, especially from both teachers and students, and I think I'm okay with not being happy about that. So
I agree.
because
I would agree with
he
that.
did say in the text that he was hoping one day, he has a dream that one day his kids will be able to go to school with little white boys and little white girls too. So,
Another dream of his that came out to me was when he said on paragraph 17 of the speech, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out to that all men are created equal.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of just
So what do you
built up
think,
a little.
Ryan?
It's increased more today that more men are created equal than it was back then. So I think we really have put up,
improved a lot.
improved in our society.
I agree with that. There hasn't really been there's not a lot of segregation today, but there's still some. When I did my Jim Crow research, I read about today's acts to make it more equal, to battle segregation. And I read that in some, like Florida, the neighborhoods that more black people live in, they aren't as protected against like hurricanes and floods than the other neighborhoods.
Ryan, how do you think specifically though? How they changed?
Um,
You mentioned how they have like grown up and how like they become more prominent, but how do you think they have changed? Civil rights, that is.
because they are, since there's not really as much of the like bigger problems with not having the same rights and being able to do the same things as everybody else, they try to make their lives safer, I guess.
So you're saying they almost like condensed down on this? Yeah. Gotcha.
James, did you have anything to add to wrap up our speech?
I think that was pretty good
That was
I
good.
think that was a solid speech.
Right on
Discussion. Yes, okay, wait.
Head home.
Because we have a short amount of time here. So, outside circles. What did the inside circles do well?
Had a lot of quality.
Yes, everyone shared. Good. Johnny?
They pointed out some like good like themes that he had in his writing.
Yeah, very good. Cameron?
Pretty much all of them had textual evidence to back themselves up.
Right, which is so important. Yes. Lila?
When they didn't agree, it like kind of forced them to put more of their ideas out there to really get their points across.
Yes. Justifying. When you disagree, justifying and getting deeper into the collective understanding. Yes, good. Norm?
I think that they did a very good job of like challenging examples and like opinions that other people had.
Right, because that's how we get to that deeper understanding.
I would like a lot of different topics.
Yeah, they did. Very good. Yep,
I
Cameron.
think they did a good job at keeping the conversation like floating.
Between everyone. Yeah. Last thing, Lila.
Like Cameron said, they made sure to include everybody. They didn't just let like one person speak through it. They wanted to
Right.
hear everybody's opinions.
Yep, civil democratic. Everyone gets their say. Okay, very quietly and quickly change. We got Liv, Paul, Cameron, Lila, Natalie, Alex, and Norm.
Do you want us to
All right, you're listening for
sure.
what you feel is the most insightful or the most powerful insight that you can evaluate at the end.
So wait, thank you.
No, so everybody on the outside needs to be just taking some notes, be looking for the most powerful insight or the best insight that you feel has been made, and you're gonna just identify that and justify that.
So wait,
Yes.
because you know, like what I did is I said like Blakely talk or like they and then Ryan.
Looking right at the
Okay,
That's what she said she doesn't want to do.
okay, so the insight circle now is going to be speaking. Everyone else is quiet, listening, taking notes on the insights. All right, and you're gonna be picking your favorite insight.
So
And just
we're not having to write down anything that they do, just mentally think about it.
You can take notes on some things that they say, but nothing specific from me. Just what you're hearing, what you're observing about the insights that they're sharing. All right, you may begin.
Okay, our first question was, what are Martin Luther King Jr.'s themes and messages in his I Have a Dream speech and letter from Birmingham Jail? I think that one of his messages was that even 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln signed to end slavery, there's still segregation and nothing really ended and got fixed by that.
I agree, and I also think his I Have a Dream speech is trying to inspire people to like keep going and don't just let everything happen still.
Going off of Cole's, in paragraph 21 of his I Have a Dream speech, he says, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of the character. When he says this, I think it's meaning that he wants change and knows everybody else wants change, and he's saying that it's going to happen whether they like it or not.
I agree with you, and I think another theme is that like, he thinks that all men were created equal in women, because in paragraph 3 of his I Have a Dream speech, he says this note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Building off of Johnny, I think that he was trying to use Abraham Lincoln as like an illusion for his speech, because in paragraph 1 of the speech, he said, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand in today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So he's using Abraham Lincoln as like a footing ground.
Yeah, I agree with Cameron. He uses a lot of like Abraham Lincoln and stuff that he did. Like again, 50 years ago, Lincoln did that in his Gettysburg Address, and a lot of people recognize that saying, so they can like think in their head like, oh yeah, this relates to what he was saying. And they also say, all men are created equal in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's in the Declaration, Constitution. He uses a lot of big articles that they like sign to make the United States
I agree.
free and stuff.
And he was also like physically standing in the shadow of his monument because he was doing a speech right next to it. Let the people live it out. Cool.
Going back to Liv, she mentioned the Declaration of Independence, and I think that he brought in the Declaration of Independence that he was trying to work with his country and not against it.
Yeah, I agree.
I also think that he tried talking about religion a lot because he talks about like, but the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. And if today's church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity. That was on the top of page 4.
And when he's like saying his speech, he's talking to the African Americans, but he's also talking to like the Muslims and the Jews and all the other people who aren't treated or get the same rights as the whites because they practice a different religion or they're different color.
Yeah, going along with Lila, paragraph 39 of the speech, he says, God's children, black men, white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, be able to join hands and sing the words of the old and the spirit. So, like, that's saying, like, with Lila, they're talking about everybody, not just black people. And, like, they are, that's the point of the speech, but he's gathering everybody who doesn't have the same rights. And he uses a lot of biblical saying throughout the whole speech and the letter because biblical sayings were big at that time, and he could engage people with their emotions or feelings because he wants to help relate it to the audience with the biblical sayings.
I agree.
I really like how in his speech he like tries to put us in their shoes a little bit. Here's a quote: "We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. This shows us that he was. It's hard for everyone.
Where'd you find that quote?
Somewhere. I have it written down. My bad.
What after what Cam said, he pointed out that colored people, like all races that were not like higher social statuses that did that. He said, the Negro lives in a long time with the poverty and the vast social prosperity, saying that they didn't get as many privileges and rights as the whites.
Where did it say that?
Paragraph 3, the bottom.
Yeah.
Of the letter or the
Speech.
He also talks about how like white people have never had to deal with what they were dealing with. Because on the bottom of page 2 here, it says, when you have seen village policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, it says, perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait.
Yeah, we had a lot of themes and messages, but now what about the rhetorical devices that he used?
I think he uses a lot of metaphors towards on the last paragraph of his letter from Birmingham. Because let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from the fear-drenched community. Like kind of relating that to like storms and stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that he used repetition the most, because in his I Have a Dream speech, he repeats "Let freedom ring" a lot. Also, I have a dream. I believe a lot.
Going off of what Colt said when he said "Let freedom ring," I said that this kind of shows that the black man and white men should be equal. He wants it to be true, and he tells them that it's going to happen. He states he's like, "Let freedom ring." He's not like, "Oh, freedom will come soon." He's saying we're gonna have it now, and if we don't, we're gonna do something about it.
I think he uses amplification a lot too, like to amplify the situation when he keeps repeating himself and adding more information onto each after every time he repeats himself.
I agree.
I think
Like going off of Johnny in paragraph 13, he says a lot about going back to your or 14, going back to your states, go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, South Carolina, and your ghettos and slopes.
He uses a lot of repetition. Like when he says "I have a dream," he said that multiple times because I think that he wanted to it is obviously a dream because he is he's dreaming it. It's not happening yet. He wants it to happen, but he's sharing his dream to many people. So he's trying to make the other people strive for the same dream that he has, so he can get the other people to follow him.
I agree.
I really like the words that he uses. Like the diversity of the words. In the MLK speech on page 2, in the middle of the page, he says, "We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of highways and hotels of the cities." Like some of the words that he used there, very hard hitting. Like heavy, fatigue, brutality.
It makes it seem like a serious situation.
He also uses illusion. We kind of touched on it in the first question, but what I have for illusion is he uses the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and like Johnny said in the first one, he's saying that because he wants them to recognize that this has happened before and it's happening again and they need to do something about it. So mentioning that stuff, he's showing that, I guess I said.
I agree. Our last question is how is social progress best achieved? I think that life for blacks have improved because there's no longer slavery, but there's still reports of segregation and active racism, like the George Floyd thing.
Yeah, but it's improved a lot since
Yeah.
he gave a speech and no more slavery and
Even though like this was when they were segregated, there isn't as much segregation, but there still is. Like 2020, there was a lot of stuff around there, and like I think that the whole speech and this is that it really secured after the speech, it really secured their rights. Like they, not directly after the speech, but they got access to restaurants, transportation, public services, stuff like that, and I really think that with this speech and the letter, it really helped them realize that, oh, we're not doing the right thing for them, so we need to change and have them have the same rights.
Like Olivia said, like in 2020, there was a lot of like protests going on by the African Americans because they felt that things weren't fair. Like they felt things weren't fair back then, but back then it was like they actually didn't have rights, and nowadays they just like they don't feel like things are fair. So it's not as big as it was. Like it's not as big as a problem as it was back when Martin Luther King Jr. was alive, but it's still a little bit of a problem, but not as big.
Yeah,
agreed.
In another part of the speech, he talked about how neither rest nor tranquility in America will happen until like they got their equal. They got to be treated equally, and that some Americans would have a rude awakening if they didn't like start fixing things. And I took that as like kind of a threat to like just for them to like tell them to do a better job.
Yeah.
Where'd you find that?
7.
I saw that too.
Yeah, I think that overall, that after the speech, it really made them realize like, oh, how like bad we were treating them, and they need to change.
Yeah.
That we need to change.
I agree.
All right. Oh, good discussions that we're having here today. Because of time, we're going to very quickly switch to our last group. Quickly, quietly. Thank you. Lauren, Harley, writer, Brandon.
Everything is pretty. Yo, what's up, Brandon? Alright, look. Yeah.
Yours will actually be just a little bit
When am I starting?
shorter than the others because of
You can have a really good start.
Yeah. Good morning.
Are you going to get settled down so the insight group can start? All right, you may begin.
I have no clue like this.
So starting off with what he and messages in both I have a dream speech and in his letter to jail. I'd say his theme in I have a dream speech is like for he wants everybody like not just black people but like any color people who are treated unfairly to get better rights.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll say I agree with that. I mean, it is pretty sound of a discussion, but by the way, at least it makes sense. Like if okay, well, I don't really know what I can say. Well, yeah, that makes sense. If you, Martin Luther saying, it's not just those of color, right? Restating what he said. Not just those of color, but anyone who's, at, disadvantage, anyone who's being thrown under the bus. Everyone deserves equal rights, and they all deserve the same. They all deserve the same. Anyone else want to say something?
I agree with that because
Thanks.
he was pretty much just trying to fight so that his kids could have a better life than he did, and so that they could go to a nicer school. Pretty much just have a better life than he ever did.
Yeah.
I think one of his themes was Christianity. That's how he compares himself to people like all the apostles.
Yeah.
Uses it for like why he's doing this stuff.
I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure in his, I'm not entirely sure, but in his letter to Birmingham Jail, I think he talked about the differences between white and black churches, on how high or low quality everything is, if it's like all bad and broken and whatnot, as well as that, not Birmingham, but with schools as well.
Where is that in the text?
I could not tell. I honestly could not tell you. Very sorry, good sir, but I could not tell you.
Ryder, why do you think that he had those Christian illusions? What was his purpose to it?
I don't know. I think it maybe to help like people white people that are Christians get like on his side and stuff. Help them with this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Lauren, do you have anything to add?
I just think he really talks about how no one should be discriminated against because of their race, religion, or beliefs. I do agree that he uses Christianity a lot.
Mackenzie, do you have anything to add?
So let's move on to how to use the rhetorical devices. I'd say he uses repetition a lot because he repeats in I have a dream speech, living through the ring, and I have a dream that.
I mean, I agree with that, especially with the large use of let freedom ring, right? He's really saying you're he's doing really well on talking to everyone and saying my man's Abraham stopped the whole slavery thing. Now segregation is pretty much done. So sorry, you're not freedom for all, I guess, here. It's gonna stay even if you don't like it. It's here.
What is your favorite figurative language?
My favorite use of figurative language. Well, if anyone want to say anything, or can I continue?
Going off of what Austin said, he's pretty much saying that we're not really free. Technically, we're still kind of slaves in a figure.
Yeah, we're still fighting for it. But
yeah, we're still fighting for freedom in many ways, because the white man just has everything, and we all always have to sit at the back of the bus, for example, while they get us up front.
Yeah, I agree with repetition. I think he likes to use it to really get his point across. Use it a lot so that people get it in the brain.
Yeah.
I agree with repetition, and that he wants to get his point across.
Do you have any more to add?
No.
Mackenzie, would you like to say something?
I noticed the same metaphor.
Yeah, metaphor makes sense. Want to elaborate on it?
Yeah, like the dark cloud, fog. get a better understanding of what he's trying to get across.
Yeah.
What is that understanding? That there's like a lot of misunderstanding and unfairness.
Figurative language, like just yeah. Well, let's just hop on over to the final question. How is social progress against current rights and whatnot best achieved on how civil rights have changed over this century? I think, well, obviously slavery and segregation is like basically gone, but there's still people who decide to be racist. It doesn't make sense, no, but they still say, you know what, why not?
So how is it best achieved?
Well, I mean, obviously, we figured out, it's wrong. I don't really have anything to bounce off. So, anyone want to add anything?
Going off of Austin, there's always just gonna be like some sort of like racism in the world,
Yeah.
no matter what. Like then it was segregation, and now it's just people just being racist.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys for these great discussions. Overall, in all three discussions that we've had, I have seen you guys grow in your courage, your thought process. You've read closely, you've thought critically, you wrote consciously in preparation for it, and then our careful listening, our constructive speaking. You guys are growing in your skills so much, and in To Kill a Mockingbird, this next book that we're going to be reading, we're going to do more of these types of talks, even though we won't record all of them, but where you do have to read closely, think critically, so that we can discuss it. So what I want you to do, if you haven't already done that, on the bottom of your sheet, below that chart, describe the most powerful insight that you heard today and justify that. Write a well-developed paragraph of why that is the most powerful insight that you heard today. Could be in your own conversation, could have been in someone else's. Okay.
2 minutes.
Great job, guys.
Sorry.
We took it one day.
Yeah.
What
We're just all so say off with people together.
in